Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome in to the final game of Week 12 of this NFL season for a showdown matchup in division NFC North style between the Bears and the Vikings. Not the best Monday night game in the world. Probably not the worst either. Just right in the middle in Minnesota. So, Dome some weird things can happen. I'm Gary Hartman, joined as always by the Showdown King himself, Cody Main. Cody, how you feeling?
I'm feeling good. It always seems like when we don't think there's going to be a lot of points scored, our expectations, albeit not being overwhelmed, they're at least a little bit met closer to what we expect the games to be. Last night, I thought we would get another one on Sunday night with lofty expectations between Lamar Jackson and Justin Herbert. Didn't quite live up to my internal hype, I guess. We'll see what this game does between Josh Dobbs and Justin Fields. I think there's low-key some elements here that we could see some awesome fantasy production. Hopefully we can talk through it and find where those spots might be.
Yeah, I agree. The Chargers are just the forever tease, by the way. It's never they're never fun. They always come up short. It's really ridiculous. Hope all of you had a very successful Sunday. I know ETR as a whole, we crushed projections. We had a lot of winners. I had my best DFS day of the season. I hope many of you did as well. We'll try to keep that success rolling right into this Monday night game. Cody, when you were writing up your article, which is available on site for our subscribers, anything that you took away from a macro or construction side of things?
Yeah, I think there's kind of three big elements of this slate that are going to be present throughout the discussion of this show. And as you're building your lineups later on this evening, as you can see from the table on Gary's screen, 3-3 roster construction and 4-2, 4 Vikings, 2 Bears, going to be very, very popular tonight. I think the best value pieces are on the Vikings side. And so that's going to lean a little bit more into that 4-2 roster construction where you get one of Justin Fields and whichever skill position player you like from the Bears side, and then just kind of load up on the best remaining options from the Vikings. I think that's going to be very popular. We have Brandon Powell at 2,000, who's probably the best overall value play on the entire slate. And you have guys up top like TJ Hawkinson, of course, Joshua Dobbs, a bunch of these guys that I think are just going to kind of naturally fill into that roster construction, which leads me to point number 2. It looks like it's going to be pretty stars and scrubs heavy. The mid-tier, as we'll get to, and we'll talk about it as we get through these skill positions, not very attractive. You've got some spots where the skill position value on the Bears side, not very attractive because it's so condensed around the top options there. And then on the Vikings, the way that they price the running backs and some of the secondary and tertiary pass catchers, going to make it tough to really get into kind of some of these balanced roster construction. So I think we'll see a lot of 2 quarterback builds with Josh Dobbs and Justin Fields kind of being the cash game and tournament cornerstones. And then you funnel in some of these cheaper guys like Brandon Powell, and it really leads you to this very stars and scrubs heavy build. So I think some of these mid-tier values might get squeezed out a little bit. And then that brings me to point number 3, which is salary really doesn't matter on the slate. And of course it does to some degree because there are lineups you can't build with all of the top guys. But just because of the way the slate is priced out, I think, you could get lineups where you feel very good about the base projection and it probably leaves $600, $800, $1,000 or more on the table. And that's because Justin Fields is too cheap. Josh Dobbs is too cheap. You can make a case, and we'll get to him here in a second. TJ Hawkinson is like $1,000 underpriced given the context of this slate. So I think getting a little bit more comfortable, potentially leaving a little bit more money on the table is one way to go about kind of getting unique on this slate. So if you normally set your caps, if you're somebody that likes to set your salary constraints at like 49.5 or somewhere in that vicinity, maybe get a little bit more comfortable leaving, going even lower with that respect, just because I think there's going to end up being good lineups that are duped quite frequently that, leave 49.4, 49.5 on the table. So those are kind of the 3 overarching themes that I'm keeping in mind as I'm going through my builds. And hopefully we can talk through ways to get different, even if we're playing into some of those roster constructions tonight.
Per usual, Cody, great table setting, great breakdown. Let's dive right into those quarterbacks. As you mentioned, will be very popular kind of no matter how you shake out DFS building, construction, tournaments type style, anything. Probably both guys underpriced here. Fields at 11.2 when we kind of talk about his ceiling, and then the Pastronaut, Josh Dobbs, what we've seen out of him at 10K as someone that has definitely shown more of a ceiling than we probably thought was in that bag, both on the Cardinals and the Vikings here. So, salary not mattering too much. You got to figure if this game does play up in any capacity, it's going to come on the backs of these 2 kind of dual threat QBs. Take it wherever you want to go here. How are you feeling about quarterbacks?
Yeah, totally agree. And I think from like a macro perspective in cash game roster constructions, you should show up with both of these guys. They should be 100% owned, each of them in cash game roster constructions. They won't be. So just take whatever few percentage points of the field that does not roster them and just consider that reduced rake here. The Justin Fields and Joshua Dobbs, 100% cash game locks. I think we've got the type of salary set up here that we should be able to comfortably captain one of them as well in our best cash game lineups. Because of the $1,200 in savings, I think Josh Dobbs is probably that guy. And for tournaments, I think he's the guy that I'm a little bit more interested in here as well. Obviously, both of these guys have true dual threat upside. I think Justin Fields offers much more with his legs, although it's looked pretty good from Josh Dobbs, a bit of a career renaissance for him to this point. But just kind of everything else around the rushing upside from Josh Dobbs has me a little bit more excited here. This is a matchup against a Bears defense that has been very, very good against the run this season, and I don't think that's fluky. I think that is kind of in part to how they're playing, and it just seems like it's legit at this point. Basically, any way you slice it from any advanced metric, the Bears' run defense is incredibly good, top third in the league or better in most of these metrics, and this is already a Vikings team that wants to pass a lot. So you give me a quarterback like Josh Dobbs, who is going to be taking off via design runs and scrambling. And when he's not doing those things, is more likely to be passing than the quarterback on the opposite sideline. And he's at home as a 3-point favorite. I think he's probably the best overall play on the slate. You're obviously seeing that met with 76.5% total ownership. I think that's pretty right in terms of where he's going to come in at on tonight's slate, and going to be a cornerstone of most of my rosters across a full MME portfolio. And I kind of feel the same way about Justin Fields. And in the Showdown sim analysis, which you have the tab open there, Gary, it kind of looks that way from our top 20,000 simmed lineups as well. You're only seeing 1% of those lineups not roster a single quarterback, which is pretty bizarre. And 38% of those lineups rostering one, another 61% of our top 20,000 optimal lineups rostering two quarterbacks. So I think this is just a night where it looks very chalky. I think it should be very chalky. And you're just going to see a lot of lineups that, at least throughout my portfolio, that are going to have both Fields and Dobbs. And I think that's probably the way to play it tonight.
If you picked one to come around the field on the captain side of things, would it be Fields, especially given the lack? I mean, there's DJ Moore there. But the lack of excitement outside of DJ Moore from who can carry him potential from a skill position player.
Yeah, I think that's naturally the way it's going to go. Although I might be a little bit more excited about Dobbs, I think I'm going to end up with just a little bit more Fields captain because of what you mentioned. There's like one other guy that you feel two. We'll get to running back on Chicago in a second. Yep. There's maybe two or three guys that you feel good about, or at least confident enough into roster at a little bit on the Chicago side. But you can talk me into a couple of guys on the Viking side. So I think that is going to ultimately be the case. A lot of my Chicago heavy teams are probably going to have Fields at captain. The one thing that I'm finding difficult is in rostering Fields. I kind of talked about this in the article too. It's tough to get unique with a Fields captain single stack, because that single stack is most likely going to be a single stack with DJ Moore and or Cole Kmet. And the doubles you just don't feel good about because there's generally not enough pass volume here. So it feels like those are less likely to be optimal, even if they're more likely to be unique. So that's where you get into a situation where, like, if you're playing captain Fields with a single stack with DJ Moore, you need to be very cognizant of how you're constructing the rest of your roster around him in order to make sure you're unique. You can do things like, if Justin Fields captain at least two players under 20% total ownership, or at least one player under 10% ownership, things like that to kind of manipulate how unique those rosters are. But it is difficult. It's not like a Mahomes slate where we have 7 or 8 pass catchers that he's going to be throwing the ball to. It's kind of like 2 or 3 guys here. So just keep that in mind. Anytime you click in a captain Fields lineup, you just got to be a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more cognizant of how unique you have to be throughout the rest of that lineup.
Yeah, great point. I don't have anything to add. I like both quarterbacks. I do like Fields more. I'm a ceiling guy. Obviously, I want to play into the ceiling outcomes of everyone, and few quarterbacks in the league have a higher ceiling when everything hits right. You can make an argument that he's in the top 2 or 3 from a ceiling perspective of quarterbacks. I think Josh Allen to me is the guy I think of for the highest ceiling week in, week out. Jalen Hurts to me is the highest floor guy. Fields, not a high floor guy, but certainly a very, very high ceiling guy. And you could definitely paint an argument where game script is going in the favor where they need to play faster. They have to throw more than normal, plus, scrambling going to be there in Minnesota. could definitely see them playing from behind. So all good stuff there for Fields. All right, let's go over to the aforementioned running back. Let's stay on that Chicago side because things clear up a little bit here with Deonta Foreman out tonight. That does kind of make this a two-man backfield with Khalil Herbert and Rashawn Johnson, the rookie. We've been kind of hoping to see Rashawn Johnson eat into more work. I think we all like his talent, but it's just kind of been a three-headed monster when they're all healthy, and he's been kind of the second fiddle when it was him and Foreman. And now Herbert's back, and we're really projecting him to carry the lion's share of the work here, doubling up the amount of points on the projection of Johnson. But Rashawn, only 3K, Khalil Herbert, 6'8". Can paint a pretty picture for both these guys. I think Herbert would be somebody that should be in your captain pool. Take me through your thought process on these two guys here.
Yeah, we often talk about these spots where we wish we knew what the roles look like. If we just had the box scores for one position after the game, we would be able to be a little bit more comfortable with our roster constructions before lock. And this is kind of the one that I'm thinking of tonight. We talked about it a little bit in our internal Slack channel, company Slack channel, about like where should this Rashawn Johnson projection be with Khalil Herbert back, Deonta Foreman out? How much work do they give the rookie? Is he really just going to serve as kind of a guy that gives Herbert breather back touches, and also a guy that's going to be used in kind of some obvious passing down situations as he's been to this point? Or is he going to start eating a little bit more into the rushing workload? I think we've kind of settled in on like a 60-20, 45-25 type split, 60-20 or 55-25 type split, obviously with the rest of that going towards Justin Fields there. It's tough to say exactly where it's going to go. What I keep coming back to is Khalil Herbert was the running back one when he was healthy, and that was mostly with Deonta Foreman scratched. And then Khalil Herbert goes down, Deonta Foreman comes in, becomes the running back one. They had all of these opportunities to start to give Rashawn Johnson more opportunities, and they never really did that. They've kind of used him in a similar role throughout the entire season, regardless of who ends up being in or out of the lineup. So I'm kind of coming back to that point. I think Khalil Herbert ultimately serves as the running back one here again tonight. He's led the duo in rushing share when it's been both of these two guys active. He's led the duo in rushing share 45% to 26%. He leads in route participation, short down and distance. He even has a slight lead in long down and distance. Where Rashawn gets Herbert is in kind of those obvious passing down situations. In 2 minutes, he gets used a little bit more in long down and distance. So I think from game script perspective, if you're banking on Chicago playing from ahead, or at least this game playing a little bit closer to kind of neutral script, then I would be more interested in Herbert at 6,800. If you think it gets out of hand, or if you think the Bears need to lean a little bit more on their pass game, then I think Rashawn Johnson becomes a little bit more interesting at 3K. We know he's going to be used a little bit more in obvious passing downs. I think that's a palatable price tag there. And at only 13.4% ownership, doesn't seem like the field is getting there at an extremely high clip. So I do like Rashawn. I think you can play both of these guys together. I think that's okay given their respective price tags. But I do want Herbert in games where I think Chicago's playing with the lead more often. And I think I want Rashawn in games where Chicago is playing from behind.
And would you kind of reserve both of them together for large field for the lotto, or would you kind of be okay with it in midfield or smaller tournaments?
Yeah, I'm okay with both of these guys in flex, in small and large midfield tournaments. That's fine with me. Yep. I would prefer to provide a little bit of a dock on Rashawn in lineups where Khalil Herbert is played as my captain. So maybe like start, if you're using the solver, you can start with like an 8% dock, kind of see where things shake out, see how much of them you're getting together. If I feel like I'm getting too much of them together, then I can increase that boost, or that dock, I should say, a little bit, but I don't think it's going to happen too frequently naturally if you're building your lineups that way, that it's something I'm too concerned about. I do think that if this 5.2% captain ownership on Herbert holds, that he looks like a pretty interesting small and large field captain play, somebody that I'd like to get, 10, 12% of and have kind of a leverage position there. I do think there's outcomes where he just ultimately is kind of the dominating running back here. And in those outcomes, I think he can provide enough of a box score production here to pay off that $6,800 price tag and compete with guys like Fields and Dobbs to be the top overall scorer on the slate.
Yeah, awesome. Good breakdown there. Let's go over to the Minnesota running backs and another true split backfield at this point, right? Cam Akers, they trade for Cam Akers, he goes down. Alexander Madison, we thought would have one of the best roles in the league coming into the season, and he's been given that opportunity throughout most of it, but has not been able to do too much with it. As I think someone that is probably a below average football player at this point, I think we could safely say still a really good role. but fully priced 74, and Ty Chandler now, and my best ball bags are happy about it, fully eating into this role as the RB2 now. I think I make a better case for Ty Chandler here with the salary saving, less ownership. I just think he is an interesting large field tournament play. There's always that upside of, hey, at any week, like I think he's got juice, and at any week, maybe the coaching staff just feeds him more. And I kind of like playing into that uncertainty narrative, but those are my limited thoughts on this Vikings backfield. What are you thinking here?
Yeah, look, this one's tough because we have the situation where I fully respect the Bears run defense. As I mentioned off the front, I think it's totally legit. They're good in any advanced metric, whether you slice it up by rush EPA per play or explosive rush rate allowed or stuff rate or yards before contact allowed. I mean, they're good in every rush metric, which is somewhat surprising to me, but it's been now 11, almost going on 12 weeks of this from the Bears run defense. And I kind of expect it to continue, especially against a Minnesota rushing attack that I'm not all that scared of. And now you have a situation where, like you said, Alexander Madison's kind of fully priced, in my opinion. Ty Chandler's been way priced up now that he's been more involved. So you've got this split backfield that I think is fully priced in a really bad rushing matchup against the Bears run defense. And so, yes, I'm trying to find reasons to be excited about at least one of these guys because I think the ownership is going to ultimately get squeezed out a little bit, but I'm just having a tough time getting there. Over the last 2 weeks, since Ty Chandler's become a little bit more involved in the backfield, it's kind of become a true split, but Madison still does lead the backfield. So I think if there's anyone that's likely to be the RB1 here, it is Madison. He leads in rush share at 44% to 42%. Leads in routes run, short down and distance snaps, long down and distance snaps, and 2-minute snaps. So I think this is still Madison's backfield, at least at this point. Ty Chandler is going to continue to work in more. The one thing, and I keep going back to it's been a couple of weeks now, but the Bears-Chargers slate where Austin Eckler ended up having a huge game. In that game, it all came from being a receiver. Terrible rushing output from Austin Eckler in that game, but had a massive game as a receiver, and that's kind of what the Bears have been giving up. They allow the 5th highest target share to opposing running backs on the season at a 19.6% clip. So I think if you want to play into this backfield, you want to play the guy that you think has the biggest target upside. And to me, at least to this point, I still think that is Alexander Madison. He leads in long down and distance snaps at 38% to 26% over the last 2 weeks, and 2-minute snaps at 65% to 29%. I just am not overly excited about either one of these guys if they're going to end up sharing, close to 50-50. So maybe you can talk me into the Ty Chandler bull case, but I'm just kind of like throwing my hands up here. I don't know what to do with the Minnesota backfield.
Yeah, this is to me is the bull case, and Matthew writes it nicely in chat. I know positive buzz out of the Vikings camp on Ty Chandler. Plus, Madison's gotten plenty of an opportunity at this point. Like he's been given a long leash, big sample. I think they know what they have there in Alexander Madison, and then the passing game is really where we're at, right? If we're saying the Bears have an elite run D, even if the Vikings control this game, you have to figure that they're going to want to control it through the air. So even in short third down stuff or whatever, I think he can build up a floor on the ground, and the 5,800 tag is enough for me to be interested. I get it though. It's ugly. Projections aren't going to love it. You probably have to boost one of these guys to get them in large quantities. But I do like taking some shots on Chandler here. Personally, wouldn't fully avoid Madison, but Chandler would be the guy that I'm more interested in at this point.
And I think like if you're going through and clicking these guys in, you're not telling yourself a story that they're going to have some massive rushing output or be really efficient on the ground. You're maybe hoping for one of them falling in the end zone. But I think most likely what you're looking for here from one of these guys is just to rack up a couple of receptions, 4 or 5 receptions for 25, 30 yards, kind of as like a baseline receiving output for one of these guys is likely enough to get you there on top of whatever they do as a runner. But kind of as I wrote in the article here, I'm not expecting these guys to be efficient. You're just really hoping that they get that volume as a pass catcher.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's go over to pass catchers, and we'll stay on the Minnesota side because I think it is a more interesting one that probably warrants a longer conversation. And no Justin Jefferson. There were some rumors that maybe we're getting him back this week. Sounds like it will be, I don't know, the Vikings one of the week 13 teams on a bye. There's a bazillion week 13 buys, but it sounds like the next game, whether it's next week, I don't know if they're off or not. We're getting Justin Jefferson back. So we have to wait at least one more week for probably the top receiver in the game. But that does set up, and we're seeing it so far in the limited time that we've seen Josh Dobbs in a Vikings uniform, that sets up for TJ Hawkinson to have a massive role and a massive target share. Only 9K for what is an elite, especially a full point PPR role. We're seeing 58% on the total ownership right now, 12% in captain. And to give people a little bit of peek behind the curtain, he may or may not have been the highest projected optimal skill position captain guy on this slate, according to our sim analysis so far. So do you agree with that sim analysis, Cody? And how do you feel about TJ Hawkinson tonight?
I do. I think TJ Hawkinson, as I mentioned off the front, he's 9K. He probably should be 10K, 10.4, 10.6, just given the overall slate context here and given the other options that we have on this slate. He should probably be priced right around DJ Moore, 10.2, 10.4, 10.6 in that range. And because he's not, I think he's going to be probably the highest owned non-QB on the slate. That's the way we have it projected right now at both total ownership and captain ownership. I think you could see the captain ownership separate a little bit here just because of how well he is grading out in our sims. I would imagine other sims across the industry as well. But it's all for very, very, very good reason that he's grading out as well as he does. Has been the clear number one option since Justin Jefferson went down. He leads the team in target share during that span at a 31% clip, air yard share at 35.5% clip, has a 16.1% red zone target share. He's just one of those guys that, specifically because he's priced at 9K, he can give you like 9 for 80, and that's plenty. And that's kind of like the box score outcome that we've come to expect from TJ Hawkinson at this point. Going to get 9, 10, 11, 12 very catchable targets. Probably not going to get him very deep downfield, but that's okay. It results in a very high catch rate, which is super nice for DraftKings sites, like full PPR sites like DraftKings. And if he falls into the end zone, then you're definitely doing backflips. So I think he's probably the best skill position player on the slate at 9K. Know that is going to come with a ton of ownership, and I wouldn't be surprised in small field stuff to see his 11.8% captain ownership creep up towards 15% or so. I think the dual threat rushing upside of Fields and Dobbs will keep these skill position guys in check a little bit more than normal, but definitely going to be owned, and definitely for good reason.
Yeah, I have nothing to add. I think he's a great play. I know some people in chat saying they need him for season-long stuff. Totally get it. I expect a nice floor tonight. The question is, does he find the end zone a couple times? Does he have one of those 12 catch games that gives him a ceiling?
Yeah,
I like Hawkinson. It's chalky, but I have a hard time poking holes. The next guy that I think deserves his own conversation before we kind of get into the rest of these names here is Jordan Addison, right? Obviously, first-round rookie, has one more week here as the de facto wide receiver 1 on this team. We've seen flashes. I think eye test-wise, we've seen some box scores that have really popped. 8.2, 800 less than Hawkinson, with really only, a point and a half less projection and significantly less ownership. I think that makes for an interesting straight line pivot. Obviously, you can get into doubles or triples with these guys together and onslaughts and Dobbs doubles, etc. But I do think he's an interesting straight line pivot if you wanted to flip ownership on Hawkinson and Addison. Do think the floor is nicer on Hawkinson. I would say ceiling are comparable. But if you wanted to paint a picture that the ceiling was higher on Addison, I would listen to your case. How are you feeling about the rookie here tonight?
Yeah, this is a tough spot. I've been wanting to be excited about Jordan Addison for quite a long time. The box score results with Jefferson down, I think, have been a little bit underwhelming. You would have expected a little bit more from the wide receiver 1 on a pass-first offense, but I think that it's just been kind of TJ Hawkinson's show, and the team's been playing well by going with that route. So I think they've just kind of continued to stick with that. Clearly, the apple of Joshua Dobbs' eye since he came into town as well is TJ Hawkinson. I'm still cautiously optimistic, as I generally am on these young wide receivers who definitely pass the eye test, who look good and have been pretty good at earning targets. I want to continue to be high on them. I want to continue buying until that breakout game comes. And I think one of those breakout games is coming at some point for Jordan Addison. The usage has been pretty good, 21.2% target share since Jefferson went down, 34.2% air yard share. He does lead the team in red zone target share on a 10.7 yard ADOT. There's plenty to chew on here, plenty to get excited about from Jordan Addison. And I do think, like you said, $800 cheaper than Hawkinson, where salary doesn't matter a whole lot in the slate. I think a lot of people are just going to say, give me Hawk, give me the high floor. I know the ceilings are there. I've seen the box score production from Hawkinson. Joshua Dobbs loves this guy. There's no reason for me to save the $800 to get to Addison. And I hope that is going to end up causing their ownership gap to separate like we have it projected here. And if that's the case, man, if you give me Jordan Addison at 6, 7, even 8% captain ownership, I think that is a phenomenal play in tournaments, and one that I'm going to be attempting to be way overweight on is Jordan Addison at captain tonight.
I sense a flag plant potentially coming. I don't disagree with you on Addison. Let's talk about the rest of these guys here. KJ Osborne, maybe a jag at this point, as Steve Smith would say, just a guy. I think we've seen some ceiling games from him in the past, particularly under Kirk Cousins though, and like 1 or 2 per season. So I don't want to rule him out as a player that is worthy. Why can I speak today? Worthy of consideration. But 56, like we talk about like Ty Chandler, right in that no man's land of pricing, floor ceiling combo, meh, and he's got Hockenson and Addison in front of him. I don't hate it. I guess my bigger question is, and where I think where we should kind of take this, conversation is he in your captain pool, KJ Osborne? Because I think you let the projections do their thing in the flex. How do you feel about him as a potential captain here?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think the just a guy comment is perfect for KJ Osborne. If you think Jordan Addison has been a little bit underwhelming since Justin Jefferson went down, KJ Osborne's been very underwhelming as, what should be the wide receiver 2 in, again, a pass first offense with confident quarterback play. He just hasn't done much. And at this point, I kind of think this is what KJ Osborne is. He's going to have those occasional blow up games, but it's tough to predict when they're going to happen. I do think that because the price tag is cheap enough, because this team is throwing enough, and because the Bears can be beat enough through the air, that KJ Osborne should make your captain player pool if you feel pretty confident. And I do, that the captain ownership is going to hold at 2.1%. Not somebody that I'm rushing to windmill slam in at 2.1%. This is a situation where if I'm building, a 150 set, maybe I've got 3, 4, 5, 6%, something like that at most. But I do think KJ Osborne is coming with a big enough ownership discount at the captain spot that he should be in consideration.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's interesting. And then obviously, I think the other question here before we kind of dive into some of the salary saving options is any kind of, because Hockenson demands such a target share here, any kind of correlation stuff that you'd put in place rules wise between Addison and Osborne?
At captain, I think yes. At captain, if you have Jordan Addison at captain, I think you can provide a small dock on KJ Osborne. I think we feel pretty good about TJ Hockenson getting his, at least to some degree with a nice enough floor there that I'm not too worried about that. But I do think if you've got one of these guys at captain, Addison or Osborne, it's okay to provide a small dock on the other one in the flex spot.
Cool. All right. Other names here. Brandon Powell's actually coming through with more ownership than KJ Osborne. He's on the field for all 3 wide receiver sets. And that is because he's one of these guys that's going to make a lot work, right? A 2000 has a legitimate projection. Honestly, only a point or so behind Osborne. From a ceiling perspective, he's almost 3 full points behind, but from a base, he's only about, 1.4 or so, 1.3. So that makes things interesting here. 28% though. I just never know how I feel about those kind of plays. I go back and forth in my head for sure. How are you feeling about Brandon Powell? And are you interested in like Josh Oliver as a pivot there?
Yeah, this is one where Brandon Powell is probably going to hold close to that 28% in large field tournaments. But when we talk about small field stuff, the 444 always comes to mind, the 153 max, the $100 spy. Like he's going to come in at like 40% in those contests. And if that's the case, that's not a spot that I have much interest in. The 2K price tag really just makes everything work. If you plug in Brandon Powell at 2K, you can pretty much get whatever else you want on this slate. Hockenson, Justin Fields, Josh Dobbs, and it just kind of makes everything work. So from that perspective, he's going to be very, very popular in small field tournaments. And I think if that's the case, if I get the sense that he's going to end up being one of these guys, and we usually see it, one of these cheap cash game type plays that's offers the value to make all the roster constructions work. In cash game roster construction, generally will come in higher in small field tournaments, sharper contests that are using projections to kind of make a majority of their lineups. You're going to see close to 40%. That's the case. Totally okay getting away from that, even though he's got a nice projection and is very cheap. I think we kind of saw the ceiling from, we did see the ceiling last week from Josh Oliver. And I think that's why that's why DraftKings was a little bit down on TJ Hawkinson's price this week, was because Josh Oliver was the guy that got there from a box score perspective last week, although everything else kind of looked the same. It still didn't come on many opportunities. He ran around on 21% of dropbacks last week. He's been at like 18 to 19% on the season. So the role didn't change much for Oliver. Now he's extremely priced. I think he's one of these guys that makes sense as like an MME dart throw, but not somebody that I'm falling over myself to get on top of now that he's had his ceiling performance.
Cool. Anything to add on any of these guys? Oliver, 2,600 there. We have a projection on Johnny Munt. We have a projection on Jalen Naylor. Anything to add on?
Yeah, these guys are just like super large field MME dart throws that I think if you ended up with, a percent or two of, you can feel okay about, but not guys that I'm trying to forcefully get into lineups.
Yep. Totally agree. Well, honestly, the thing I like to think about with guys like a fourth receiver, when a tight end's fully involved, like Naylor or something like that, is go through your head. What percentage of outcomes do those guys catch, like a lucky touchdown or something on a four receiver set or about, like, how many times does that happen? 2%, 3% of all outcomes? If that's your answer, that's the amount that I'm looking for in my build. If I'm 150ing, just kind of a tidbit of how I think about those types of things. Okay. Chicago pass catchers, and I'm going to try to pick up the pace a little bit here. Last time we did this, it was the DJ Moore show. You and I double flag planted him. Basically, I'm going to take credit as well, even though he was your official flag plant, and he went absolutely nuke. He's priced appropriately, I think, at 10-4. Still dominating this passing offense, although Cole Kmet, certainly someone of interest here as well. How are you feeling about DJ Moore tonight with less total ownership than TJ Hawkinson, but $1,400 more in?
Moore does kind of feel like one of those guys, and maybe this is anecdotal. Maybe this is just because we've had the 50-point eruption games along with some relatively lackluster box score performances, but Moore kind of feels like the classic Gary Hartman spot where you get way over the field on captain and kind of comfortable wherever you end up with him at flex. That's kind of how I'm feeling about DJ Moore tonight. I'll probably come in around or under the field on that 49.9% total ownership. But because he's 10-4, because he's priced right around Josh Dobbs and Justin Fields, I do think captain ownership is going to be held in check. And that's the spot where I kind of want to get overweight on DJ Moore. If I come in at, and I think 11.6% for him is a little bit closer to a ceiling on his ownership than it would be a floor. So if I come in at 10, 11, 12, 13%, maybe a little bit over the field on him at captain, I'm feeling pretty good about that. But it does feel like one of those spots where if he gets there, he's going to get there because he has a massive performance, not one of kind of these middling box scores like we've seen on occasion from TJ Hawkinson, where he provides that nice floor, but sometimes doesn't have the ceiling. Moore kind of feels like the opposite. Maybe not a super high floor because this is a low volume pass offense, but has a massive ceiling because he's kind of this alpha wide receiver one. That's kind of how I'm handling DJ Moore. And then the rest of this, man, it gets really gross really quick. You can obviously make a case for Cole Kmet. I think he's got kind of, 2 touchdown upside anytime he's on the field, but the volume hasn't been great. He's Chicago's, nominally serving as the pass catcher 2 in this offense, but that hasn't been a great role really to this point. It's a very run heavy offense. And it's been like a 20% target share for Kmet. What you're really hoping for is that he kind of turns that team leading red zone target share at 32.4% into a couple of touchdowns. If that's the case, of course, he can pay off that $6,200 price tag. If I'm playing Kmet, I want to be very certain that I have Justin Fields in that lineup as well, as those two are very, very, very correlated because Kmet's ceiling performances are going to come when he scores touchdowns. Those are the two that I feel good about. I wrote in the article that if Darnell Mooney came with a big enough ownership discount that I would have a little bit of interest because he's one of those guys that's going to be on the field for 90% or more of Justin Fields' dropbacks. And that can sometimes be good enough just to run into enough targets to pay off the price tag. He's at an 81% route participation rate on the season. He's only had 2 games where he scored more than 10 DraftKings points. That's kind of going to be the situation with Darnell Mooney. But I think when we're starting to get into him at 4,800 and 12% owned, I think that's the point where I start to consider him a little bit more than I normally would. And he's kind of the last guy. I mean, after that, it's true MME dart throws with EQ St. Brown, Tyler Scott, Robert Tonyan. These guys just aren't running enough routes and or involved enough to consider seriously. You just kind of have to sprinkle them into like an MME portfolio.
Beautiful. Some more context around DJ Moore, right? Obviously, he's proven to be an incredibly high ceiling player. And on the Bears, which was a little bit of a concern, right? Going to the new team in a Chicago offense that has struggled over the last couple of years. When this team scores big points, he's usually involved, right? There was the week 7 against the Raiders that they put up 30 points that he only had 8 for 54, but, still had 9 targets, just wasn't able to kind of, the volume was still there. His huge games, it is worth noting that week 4 was against the Broncos when they were like an historically bad defense, right? Week 5 was against Washington. That was the one that was that primetime game. He had 10 for 230 and 3. I mean, that's like the ultimate ceiling case. So, really good matchups in that situation. However, you look at last week, He had 7 for 96 and a touchdown in Detroit. So in a similar dome style matchup that went over the total, like if, and was 4 yards away from the bonus as well. So that was 22.6 DraftKings points. That could have been even more. I love DJ Moore here. I think if this game goes over, I think both these teams have solid run defenses. Like I think this is a game that goes through the air. I don't mind taking a shot on the over. I'm not a huge over totals guy. So, take that with a full, like that's a gut feel grain of salt. But I do think if this game goes back and forth in any capacity, the only way DJ Moore is not involved is if that's like one of those 250 and 2 rushing yards, 150 on the ground and 2 rushing touchdowns for Justin Fields, which we've seen those insane, like 80-yard touchdowns on the ground for Fields. I think that's the only way. I mean, yeah, sure. We can get a Cole Kmet high touchdown rate stuff, but I still think volume wise, it would happen through the air for DJ Moore. I know it's an expensive tag, but I love it. Have a hard time looking the other way. And maybe I'm biased. He did us well. One other showdown slate. I love him as a player. He's a Terp. I love the guy. Don't get me wrong. Me and Evan Silva, I think we're the biggest DJ Moore fans in this company. I'm a huge DJ Moore guy. All right. I think that was good on the secondary guys too. Let's go into DSTs and kickers here. And an interesting night for them for sure. Right. I mean, both guys, Josh Dobbs, obviously an incredibly smart person. I wouldn't say he's immune to mistakes. So in Justin Fields, of course, someone that can turn the ball over. I mentioned both these run Ds being good. Maybe that kind of pushes some things into more passing, which I think is interesting for these defenses. And honestly, ownership on either side, not too outsized in my opinion. How are you feeling about anything you see on your screen there?
Yeah, I think just because you have the Vikings at home as a short favorite here, they're going to look a little bit better. I think you've got kind of a little bit more of a mistake-prone Justin Fields who can turn the ball over, take sacks, things like that. You just don't have a very high pressure rate from either of these defenses. However, very cheap. 4,400 for the Vikings as a home favorite, I think is pretty nice. I actually wrote them up as a value play on tonight's slate. I think they're in, like one of our cash optimals. If somebody flipped over the Vikings in cash, wouldn't be surprised at all. I think they're a little bit more likely to be optimal than the 25.9% ownership would indicate. So I like them as a flex play in small and large field GPPs. And I feel the same way about the Bears. I know the Josh Dobbs magic has been very real, but we've got kind of a track record of this guy being a backup caliber NFL quarterback. And, all of a sudden lately he's been playing very well, which is great for him, obviously. But I think there are situations here where Josh Dobbs could perform poorly, could turn the ball over, could take some sacks here. I think at 15.2% ownership, $3,800 price tag. In this Bears defense, the reason why I'm a little bit more excited about them, you have a Vikings offense that's going to drop back a ton. They're not going to want to run against this Bears run defense. It's been very good. I think they're going to drop back a ton. Obviously, dropbacks create more opportunities for our fantasy defense to score points. So I do like the Bears defense at 15.2% as well. The kickers, interesting. We've got a dome game, right, which is always good for the kickers. We've got two offenses who, seem likely to occasionally stall out in the red zone. And that can create a little bit of a nicer floor for guys like Greg Joseph and Cairo Santos, but the price tags are still pretty high on these guys. I think I prefer the defenses if forced to choose between defenses or kickers tonight. But it's one of those spots where, like we saw last night, you can see some field goals go through, and that can be enough to get these guys into optimal lineups. It's just tough to predict exactly when it's going to happen. And I think for me tonight, I kind of just want to bank on the volatility of the defenses if kind of going in this direction.
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure. Although you could obviously see the kickers get there. I don't have too strong of an opinion either way. Fit in where they get in where they fit in there. That mid tier is kind of weird tonight with the Darnell Mooney's, Ty Chandler, KJ Osborne types. If you like these guys more, I would understand. Okay, Cody, let's get to flag plants and get out of here. I think I know where you're going, but by all means, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I kind of telegraphed this one, but I'm kind of playing into, not necessarily narratives, but kind of things that I've built up in my own mind after going through the slate and talking it through with you here. Chicago Bears run defense is incredibly good. I think that's going to frustrate the Vikings coaching staff and the coaching staff and the offense as a whole. And that's going to force them into even more dropbacks than we've grown accustomed to, which has been already a high rate for the Vikings with Kevin O'Connell calling plays. High pass rate offense, a wide receiver one who is out, a rookie wide receiver who is stepping into that role. He has had some big games. We haven't seen him quite frequently enough lately, but I think there is a big game on the horizon for Jordan Addison and his 21.2% target share and 34.2% air yard share. I think Jordan Addison is the optimal captain tonight.
Yeah. And obviously he did have a huge game earlier in the season. I think when you were saying like the pedestrian box scores, this is post Kirk Cousins. It's a whole different world for Jordan Addison there. But I think Josh Dobbs has shown he can support some pass catchers. I love the Jordan Addison call, especially as a pivot to Hawkinson. I'm doing it. I know we don't usually go up to the second most expensive player on the slate as your flag plant, but I agree. Let's go full Hartman here. And I don't care where you get him in your flex ownership, really don't give a crap. I want to get well over the field in captain because it operates as a couple different ways. You could do it as a pivot to Fields and just say like, hey, this is where their offensive production is going right into DJ Moore. Or you could do it as a Vikings onslaught classic opposing team captain. I think that works well. 2 here, only 11%. And I wouldn't be surprised if it comes in right around there, 10-12 on a 10-4 DJ Moore. Got to hopefully lightning strikes twice here with DJ Moore on a showdown slate for us this season. All right, Cody. Anything else to add for the people?
I think if both Addison and DJ Moore get there, we're in for an exciting football game tonight. So hopefully that's the case just for our viewing experience. But more importantly, let's make some money tonight. I'm excited for this slate. Let's hope it goes well.
Me too. All right. We will be back on Thursday night. Of course, check out everything going on at establistherun.com. Crazy week coming up ahead with tons of buys. I think we have a 10-game main slate Thursday night. A fun game, though. Seattle at Dallas. Let's hope Geno Smith's shoulder is back to at least being at a level where they can keep up with this Dallas team. I think the Niners -7, as Silva was also on, was one of the easiest bets of the season on Thanksgiving. Would like to see that game be more competitive, but should be a fun one to talk through on Thursday night. We wish you all the best of luck here tonight to wrap up week 12. And if you guys have season-long fantasy playoff stuff on the line, if you have best ball bags, that's coming down to an end of regular season, anything, we're wishing you the best, pulling for you. And we appreciate you joining us as always. For Cody, I am Gary. We will see you all on Thursday.